Hey YouTubers! Since I earned my 700th subscriber recently, I thought I'd commemorate the occasion by doing something special. So strap in and prepare yourselves as Fool Killer enters the third dimension! Ooh! Ah! And why am I wearing 3D glasses, you ask? Well, aside from recently seeing Robert Zemeckis' A Christmas Carol, I thought it would be appropriate since it seems that now TNA gimmick matches are entering the third dimension. Which reminds me, there's something very, very important that I need to do. Why? Why? TNA, do you realize this is going to be your fourth Six Sides of Steel match in the last 3 months? Seriously, are you trying to kill this gimmick? What is the cage match the new ladder match now? You know, a 2 out of 3 falls match is a gimmick in itself. Is it really necessary to start adding gimmicks within gimmicks? Why do you need a steel cage? What's the point? I mean, you already have a Feast or Fired match, a Last Man Standing match, and an elimination match at Final Resolution. Do you really need this too? And speaking of which, do you really think it's a good idea to have an 8-man tag team elimination match at the pay-per-view when Survivor Series just happened? Is that wise? If you want to do an 8-man tag, that's one thing, but why do you need the elimination gimmick? Why is Steiner and Lashley a Last Man Standing match all of a sudden? Do you think adding a gimmick is somehow going to make that match interesting? Because it's not. You know, I really don't know what TNA is thinking with this stuff. I mean, it's not that the gimmicks don't make sense. It's just that they're totally unnecessary. And I really think they need to start asking themselves the question of, is this something that's really going to enhance the pay-per-view, or is it something that we're adding just for the hell of it? And while I'm on the subject, I have another question. TNA, do you want the buy rate of Final Resolution to suck? Because it kind of seems like you do. This week they had a sit-down interview with Dixie Carter, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But they must have mentioned this thing 50 times during the show. How many times did they mention Final Resolution? I don't know, maybe 2 or 3? Maybe 4? I mean, from what I saw this week, it seems like TNA's list of priorities right now is Hulk Hogan, Dixie Carter's Twitter page, and then Final Resolution is like down here somewhere. I mean, it almost feels like they're throwing this pay-per-view away so they can spend all their time talking about this other stuff. I mean, it's like they're going out of their way to not hype up this pay-per-view, and I don't understand that. I don't. I mean, Mick Foley has a match at the pay-per-view with Abyss and Raven and Dr. Stevie. And at this point, you might as well just take that match off the show completely because he hasn't even talked about it in the last 2 weeks. And D'Lo even mentioned that. I mean, he was like, don't you have a match at Final Resolution in a couple of weeks? Shouldn't you be thinking about that? But he's not. The only thing Foley's thinking about is Hogan. He doesn't care about his match, and if he doesn't care about it, then why should we? Why should we care about the Feast or Fired match? You haven't promoted it on the show. You haven't even mentioned it yet. I mean, sure, you put up some YouTube videos about it, but not everybody looks at those. You had Alex Shelley versus Doug Williams this week, and throughout this whole match, I don't know if the fact that the Motor City Machine Guns and the British Invasion are fighting for the tag team titles at Final Resolution was mentioned even once. The announcers spent plenty of time talking about how the Brits are trying to prevent Beer Money from getting another title shot, but the Guns, who are getting the next title shot and already have a couple victories over the Brits in tag team and singles matches, weren't even acknowledged. What kind of sense does that make? Look, if TNA promoted Final Resolution half as much as they've been promoting Hulk Hogan and Dixie Carter's Twitter page, then there wouldn't be a problem. But it's almost like they decided that they couldn't do all three for some reason. Now, the Twitter page itself is a great idea. I love that Dixie Carter uses that to get feedback from the fans. And it's things like that that make TNA so much more of a fan-friendly company than the WWE. But as useful as something like that can be, it's not going to make you money. Pay-per-view buy rates are what makes you money. And if they continue writing the show this way, then they're looking at a piss-poor buy rate for Final Resolution. And that's the bottom line. A good chunk of the card hasn't been hyped up whatsoever. And the main event of AJ versus Daniels is looking just like the main event of Turning Point was last month. The build-up has been good when they focused on it. But when you only focus on it for a few minutes a week like this, then the match won't mean as much as it should, no matter how good it is, and the people won't be interested to see it as much as they should be. And everyone should be interested to see AJ versus Daniels. It just seems like, as far as the writers are concerned, the real main event of this pay-per-view is Kurt Angle versus Desmond Wolfe. And I don't disagree with that, but it shouldn't be getting priority over the world title match. But getting back to Dixie Carter for a minute. TNA promoted the hell out of this sit-down interview she did. And for the amount of time they spent hyping this thing up, it was going to have to be pretty damn groundbreaking to deliver what they were promising. Did it deliver? Not really. TNA asked her about Hogan and Sting and Jeff Jarrett, and the answers were things like, oh, Jeff was removed because of a personal situation, and we'll just leave it at that. Hogan's going to be working with me very closely behind the scenes. And it was just a bunch of softball questions and answers, basically. And I think we all pretty much expected that. But hell, TNA pushed this thing like it was David Frost and Richard Nixon, and she didn't even say anything that you couldn't find out for yourself by logging on to PW Insider for 5 minutes. At the very least, she could have given us some new information. Now, the extended interview that they put up on the YouTube page, that was a different story. Now, and if you haven't seen the extended interview, then I definitely recommend you go check that out and watch it, because that was where she covered the fan questions that she got through the Twitter page, and that was the really interesting stuff. And she answered questions about making the X Division important again, and whether Hogan coming in is going to affect the push of the young talent, and why the Knockouts get so much screen time on Impact. You know, things that people really wanted to know. Because, she actually talked about a lot of stuff that I didn't expect. You know, I thought she was going to dodge a lot of those things, honestly. But she was really honest and candid. And, frankly, this should have been the stuff that they aired on Impact, because this was the stuff that everyone was really wondering about. I mean, a lot of people were worried, and are worried, that Hogan is going to bury all the young guys when he comes in. A lot of people are wondering when the X Division is going to become important again. And the Knockouts thing, I mean, that's been pretty widely debated around here since Doug made that video a few weeks ago. So, it's kind of a shame that this part of the interview didn't air on Impact, because this was the really good stuff. And I actually felt a little more at ease about the Hogan situation when I saw this. You know, because it was good to find out that she knows that pushing the young talent is what's important right now, and that Hogan coming in isn't going to change that. And she knows that the fans want to see more of the X Division and stuff like that. And it was a really interesting interview, actually. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go check that out. So, Impact this week was a lot like Impact last week, actually. It was a good show taken on its own merits. You know, there were some good matches, especially Sarita versus Hamada. You know, I'm reasonably happy with the way the push of the young talent is going right now, but the hype for Final Resolution is suffering, and that's a problem that they need to address if they don't want the pay-per-view buy rate for this to go down the shitter. And if I'm going to talk about WWE for a minute here, I know there's been a lot of noise lately about WWE starting a youth movement of their own, and that's great if that's what they're doing. But the bottom line is they've teased pushes for the young talent plenty of times in the last few years and never really followed through on it. So I don't know what makes people think this is going to be any different. I mean, it looks like they were serious about making CM Punk a top guy a few months ago, but then The Undertaker came along and shot that theory all to hell. And there's a million other examples just like that. So it's awesome if WWE is really serious about their youth movement, but guess what? Until I see guys like Miz and Morrison getting clean pinfall victories over Triple H and The Undertaker, and thus being elevated above those guys in a meaningful way, then it's all talk. So until that happens, my mantra is, I'll believe it when I see it and not before.